The Court of Public Opinion, and you can join us anytime you like. We've got about 3 hours to be together. 0491 65 68 60. Got it? Simple as that. Just call us. Oh, dear.
There's a phone call.
Oh, it's a phone call. Oh, sorry. Hi, who's
I'm
that?
here.
Oh,
It's
Les. Les, how are you, Les?
Good, very good, Jeremy. 1 week to spring, best time in Adelaide.
Well, it is, really. You can sort of smell it, can't you?
Days are getting longer, Jeremy. We're enjoying it more. Good to be alive.
Yeah, I think the positive approach is far better, than the sky is falling.
We need a great deal more positivity in the world at the moment.
You're not wrong, Les. You're not wrong. What's up in your day?
Look, as you know, we've been talking about this communications bill, also known as the misinformation and disinformation bill, run by our friends at ACMA, a government body that, if the listeners don't know, it's the Australian Commonwealth Communications and Media Authority, or we probably call it, Jeremy, the watchdog.
Well, it's the cop on the beat.
Cop on the beat, and look, run by Michelle Rowland, the minister. And I don't know too much about her. I don't think she's one of the high-profile ministers in Albanese's government, but you don't hear too much about her or talking about this bill. But it's a significant piece of legislation that's going to potentially cancel out a lot of people. And you, for example, are a person who has been cancelled, so you know the feeling.
Yeah. Oh, well, the thing about it is you've got to have rules, but if you take something like social media, and it's, what it is, and I take it that this bill is aimed at that. This is trying to get social media and, for example, what we're doing today under the rules of ACMA. Now, at the moment, it's not. I don't think there are any rules at all. It's kind of like the Wild West. But if you're not abusing it, I don't necessarily think you need the heavy hand of authority applied to you. It'd be wise just to wait until something needed action taken upon.
Jeremy, if I can give you an example, and this just happens to be, a very much in tune at the moment example. Alan Jones put up in his what do they call it? His TV program, ADHTV.
Oh yeah.
And he's a man who's been cancelled, a prominent broadcaster, good man, good, virtuous, conservative values, trying to do the right thing by the community. And he put up his session on Wednesday night. It went to YouTube.
Yeah.
And it's up on YouTube. And this is actually a real life example. Now, he spoke about the dangerous totalitarian bill, which is this communications bill. He also spoke about Pfizer and Moderna reaping in something like $183 billion worth of revenue through the COVID vaccines,
yes,
i.e. Big Pharma.
Yes.
And my good lady wife sent that YouTube clip to another person, and then the other person came back to us and said that the clip didn't come through, but there was a gigantic big red block, which then claimed it was potentially the link contained malware. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, now I'm not sure, is it Google who owns YouTube? Is it Google who is
it
also owns Gmail, which was the recipient of my wife's email?
Yeah.
Are these organisations already, before this bill is in place, already cancelling people? And I just wonder, it's rather incredible that Alan Jones talks about the totalitarian bill, because he's not in favour of it.
Yes.
He also talks about Big Pharma. So one shouldn't necessarily extrapolate one or either or both of these issues are to Google controversial enough to say, well, we're going to technologically block it. And this is what I'm ringing about, is that we're starting to introduce these Orwellian concepts of cancelling people, censoring people, and really, is this the way the Australian democracy wishes to go? And where will it go? And I think I went to a session run by David Fawcett last Friday, Jeremy, and he spoke about this bill in quite a great deal of detail. And he said, well, ACMA, whilst it is the body that will control this, but it won't be ACMA, because ACMA will introduce such huge fine on digital platforms that the digital platforms will be fearful of being fined and held to account. So they will then do the monitoring and also the censorship at their level. So it's almost by blackmail through ACMA because of the fine structure, how this system could work. And it's very deceptive, in my view, that the Australian government is trying to introduce this sort of legislation, particularly in the time when they have control of both houses, because with the Greens,
Yes.
they'll get this. And David Fawcett made the comment, it's quite likely this will go through in its entirety. And then you say to yourself, well, like The Voice, what are the repercussions? How do we cope with it in the end when it's in actual operation? This is the danger.
Les, what are the problems? What is the thing they're trying to fix?
Well, I think they're trying to fix that there isn't misinformation or disinformation easily promulgated. But the reality is that it's like any type of movement that the public makes. You can go into a library and say to yourself, I make my own selection from the content that's in the library. I go into a newsagent, I make my own selection from what's available.
Sure.
And then we hope, I know the previous caller was talking about NAPLAN results, and you and I from the year where reading, writing and arithmetic were keystones to our education, and we understood the basics, and the basics give us the opportunity to have logic, thought process, how we can discern the information we receive. I mean, let's face it, we're all human beings interconnecting with each other, whether it's a digital platform or it's face-to-face communication. And when you meet someone potentially for the first time, you analyse what they're saying, and you work out for yourself with your own knowledge if they're telling you the truth, if they're telling you nonsense. And I think the public needs to have this opportunity to have freedom of choice. And this is basically, I think, a freedom of choice, i.e. democracy, that we look at content. And I did put up a post on the Jeremy Cordeaux Facebook page, and that's Sharry Markson talking about what used to be some years ago classified as misinformation, disinformation, and also conspiracy theory, i.e. the origins of the COVID virus.
Yes.
Now, Shari, who's a very good investigative journalist,
yes,
she did a lot of work, interviewed a lot of people, went to China, did all the background stuff, and she deduced quite legitimately that the virus originated from the Wuhan lab. Now, I've spoken to people like Professor Nikolai Petrovsky, and this is a guy who, right from the start, said that the virus came out of Wuhan. And he reverse engineered the virus through a supercomputer in the United States. And he came up to the conclusion that it wasn't occurring in nature, it was man-made or man-altered. And he then deduced it came out of Wuhan for all the research that he did. And of course, he was pilloried for saying that. And now recent documents released in the United States are actually somewhat confirming that this conspiracy, misinformation, disinformation wasn't that at all. And then I go back to say to myself, well, if ACMA's the cop on the beat and policing all this, well, who's to say that the government, which is the often the biggest source of misinformation, disinformation, isn't trying to use the Orwellian techniques of controlling us and controlling us via these ACMA type legislations. And is it really going to be good for us, or are we going to be continually deceived? I mean, again, another example of that is for years upon years, and I wish it was true what they were saying, that electricity would be cheaper.
Oh, yes.
Now, it's never cheaper. It's only gone one way, and that's north, not south.
Yeah.
And Mr. Albanese, you told us, prior to the election that we're all going to get $275 back. Well, another piece of misinformation or disinformation, and of course, the legislation that they want to introduce doesn't involve the government. Now, how can that be so? I mean, aren't we all needing to be under the one umbrella?
Yes.
And to be all faithful to the cause and tell the truth? And where's the honesty from the government if they're not going to allow themselves to be part of the deal?
Yeah, pretty simple.
Question I have.
Yeah, no, pretty simple.
And
what do the libs? What do the libs say about this piece of legislation?
Well, they don't want it, Jeremy, but
they haven't got the numbers.
It boils back to the chamber. It's like last Friday we were talking about Mitcham Council and what happens when the activists in the chamber outnumber the people who aren't activists.
Yeah.
Well, what's going to happen? This is the perennial problem that one could almost say democracy is broken if you don't have sort of an equality when these decisions are made. But the people vote. And I guess I have to make the comment that items and subjects like The Voice or this misinformation, disinformation bill, my wife and I, we specifically go out searching for information because we're interested to know.
Yeah.
And I know, again, there was the conversation about the Australian public or public in general being apathetic. Well, I think we need to tease the public into being not so apathetic and actually start to question these things. And the more we question, and it goes back to NAPLAN, I mean, aren't educators and universities meant to create an environment where people are curious, are questioning,
absolutely,
are, turning the soil over so that we understand what's going on. But if you start to mollycoddle people to the extent we know the government, for example, wishes to practically take children out of the womb and put them into education centres so they can be...
As the twig is bent, so shall grow the tree.
Yes. So we're really thinking, well, again, where is all this going? And people like yourself or people like Alan Jones or Professor Plimer or Nikolai Petrovsky, we're all trying to say the right things and spur people into don't accept the general narrative. And this is the problem. The government wishes to put out a narrative.
Yes.
And then if you become all too accepting, you can see that your freedom of choice I think we're all getting pushed into the narrow neck of the funnel, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. When you talk about a misinformation and a disinformation bill, who is the arbiter of what is mis and what is dis?
Well, it's again what I said to you earlier, that whilst formally the legislation would say ACMA is the arbitrator, but because of the way the bill is put together, the pressure is then put on the people who run the digital platforms, and this, whether it be the YouTubes or the Metas of this world, they will be fearful that because the corporate fines are so large and the litigation issue will be so large that they will just say, okay, anything that to them looks like it could be controversial, they'll just cancel or deplatform. Now, I know one of the people on your Facebook page actually put up a post saying he's been cancelled a couple of times. So, look, this is already alive and well and happening now, even before this bill is introduced.
Yeah. Well, we've got to find some way of fighting against it. A bit hard if we haven't got the numbers. It looks like a lay-down misere.
Well, the other problem I see, Jeremy, is that from an individual point of view, or even a company point of view, who has material on a platform, a digital platform, if they cancel you, your right of appeal to make it right or to get yourself back on is almost, as David Fawcett said, almost impossible. So it's hard enough for an individual, but a corporation has even got more money and more resources.
Yep.
He said even they would have difficulty to fight it all. And so...
Well, that's not what freedom of speech is about. We should be encouraging people, and that's people on air and people ringing in, people to have a say and express themselves. And, people don't have to tiptoe around the place, being careful as to toes that they tread on, do they?
Well, they shouldn't
I refuse.
have to.
I refuse to. Liz, let me ask you about you. What's your background?
Look, I spent, sales and marketing as a generic...
I wish you were in Canberra running the joint.
Oh, look, you have said this to me before.
Well, I mean it.
I think there are better things to do in life when
Probably.
you come to our age. But look, you're still chipping away, and I'm happy to be talking with you and sharing and chewing over these.
No, I'm very grateful
issues.
for your input. I really am.
Hey, listen, can I talk about just another subject while we're here?
Yeah, of course.
You got a moment?
Absolutely.
Look, I wrote to our local member, Louise Miller-Frost, and I hope she's listening, Jeremy, because I wrote to her and her staff 3 months ago on this subject, and this may have some interest to the listeners, particularly those people who like oysters or mussels. I mean, look, we make wonderful oysters in Australia, Sydney Rock and Coffin Bay, and I do note that many of our mussels come in from New Zealand, but I also do have a great delight in having tinned mussels or oysters on toast or pumpernickel bread. That's one of the things I do enjoy with a nice glass of red.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, if you go into a Foodland or an Aldi or a Coles or a Woolworths and you go to the section where these tinned foods are, and you pick up the box, and there's quite a reasonable selection of tinned oysters and mussels, smoked and natural and in vinegar, etc. And that's all great. But here's the common denominator. They all come from China.
Yeah.
Now, the question I had for our good member of Boothby was, well, why do they all have to come from China? And what's happening with our good Australian oysters and mussels? Where are they going?
China, probably.
Well, I said that to my wife this morning. They're probably in the bellies of Chinamen, wealthy, elite Chinese people who want our good wine, they want our good food and our good seafood, etc.
Yeah.
And we're receiving I shouldn't say this, but I'm a bit suspicious of Chinese aquaculture and Chinese produce. But having gone to China, my wife and I have been there 3 occasions, and look, there's some wonderful technology over there, and they're very advanced in many ways compared to us over here in Little Adelaide. And when you have Australia's population in one city like Beijing, it's quite overwhelming when you're there.
Yeah.
And
they've got a hell of a work ethic. They've got a hell of a work ethic.
Well, look, they've got a hell of a work ethic, but they've also got a monumental problem. I mean, whilst we move away from oysters and mussels, we can recognise that China's workforce, 20% of the youth is unemployed at the moment. They've got massive debt problems, and these ghost cities cities they've built which have turned into ghost cities. These large Chinese businesses are extremely heavily leveraged, and people aren't moving into these big cities, i.e. then they call them ghost cities, and big infrastructure, mass transit railway, enormous development over there, but I think they're heading for a big crunch, which then causes the world to have a big hiccup as well.
Well, what usually happens is when things get to that point, they think to themselves, well, we're going to have a revolution on our hands if we don't do something. Let's have a war. That's going to unite everybody. We'll get everybody together and we'll go and pick on somebody else, lest they get together and pick on us.
Well, look, hopefully with their internal problems, they lay off Taiwan. And Taiwan is a delightful country and very technologically advanced, and most of the computer chips of the world come from
Absolutely.
Taiwan. So if they get bogged down in a conflict, then that's going to really cause a major problem for the world. But you asked me what my life was. I spent most of my working life in the Australian wine and spirit industry, Jeremy. I was worked for a company called G. Grant and Sons, which many people wouldn't know that name, but they'd be familiar with the company Orlando Wines, and they'd be familiar with Coolabah Cask, they'd be familiar with Carrington Champagne, Jacobs Creek, which became one of the biggest selling red wine products in the world.
Absolutely.
So I was very lucky to work in that organisation for a good number of years and did some national work for them and looked after South Australia and Northern Territory for a while. We had huge brands. We were part of what they call the PLO of the wine industry, the Penfolds, Lindenmans, Orlando. Interesting industry because back in the early 70s, when many of these companies, they were just family companies. They were run by mums and dads, essentially. A lot of German immigrants who came out from there and established vineyards and then grew their business, but they weren't necessarily good at sales and marketing. But the big cigarette companies like the WD, H.O. Wills and Philip Morris of this world were in that era printing money, making money hand over fist because cigarettes were very popular and the governments weren't leaning on them. So they had stacks of money to invest. So they invested heavily into the Australian wine industry and bought out a great chunk of it. And hence those big brands started to evolve and grow. And as I said, I had a good time in that industry, very, very good to work in the hospitality industry, working with people and travelling all over the country.
How long have you been retired?
Oh, look, I retired at 55, so 15 odd years.
Well, I think you would have seen the best of the wine industry these days. I don't know that you'd even recognise it or want to recognise it. It's a completely different kettle of fish.
Well, in my time, we went from practically direct deliveries from our warehouse to individual retailers and hoteliers, bottle shops, to central warehousing, and as did the food industry, central warehousing, and then wholesalers who were in numbers, then less numbers as they were, one took over the other, and not too much different to the Coles and Woolworths who are now running gambling and liquor, food in this country, monopolies, if you like. Again, this is another question of the Australian consumer watchdog, how monopolies are allowed. Some monopolies are allowed to evolve and develop and other monopolies are stopped. I guess we can talk about, you were talking earlier in the day about Alan Joyce at Qantas, and the best thing for the Australian consumer would be to allow Qatar to have more flights in this country, we have access to cheaper airfares and services. But probably Mr. Joyce, in connection with the Australian government, said, "No, leave us alone. So don't bring any more competition in, which could improve our business as well." I mean, to make. Here's another one which I think is absurd. We have Qantas employees who are lining up now to have a share inducement that Mr. Joyce has promised them from all this $1 billion worth of profit. And the poor shareholder, my wife gives me the strap for this because she's got Qantas shares. I sold mine, saw the writing on the wall, and she says, "Why didn't you get rid of mine as well?" She hasn't seen a dividend from Qantas for I don't know how many years. So the poor starving shareholder who stumps up the company with their hard-earned isn't making a zack out of Qantas. If Mr. Joyce thinks that's fair and wants to paint 3 of his aircraft with the Yes slogan and all the other things that he's done, as far as I'm concerned, the little leprechaun can go back from where he came from.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that, but
No,
that's the way I feel.
you feel free to say it. Listen, my friends, thank you, and do call us again.
Will do, Jeremy. Look, you have a wonderful day.
I will. You look after yourself, Les.